Welcome to the Gallatin County Democrats Legislative Check-in for April 6, 2025. I'm your host, Joe Hancock, and our guest for this evening is Representative Peter Strand from House District 63, covering a stretch of northwest Bozeman between Babcock and Baxter and running west to the Gallatin River. As a reminder, this event is being recorded and will be shared on our YouTube channel. If there are any questions, you can enter them in the chat or raise your hand using the Zoom React menu at the bottom of the screen. Representative Strand was born in California and moved to Montana after earning a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Occidental College and a Master's in Elementary Education from Lesley University. He then spent 28 years teaching in the Bozeman public school system before a well-deserved retirement. That lifestyle didn't suit Peter very well, though, so he thought that becoming a lawmaker would be a good career choice. He is now testing that hypothesis as he currently serves in his first term in the Montana legislature. Welcome, Peter.
Good to be
All
here
right,
for sure.
huh? And we just, Jennifer Magic has just joined the chat.
Hi,
So
Jennifer.
I'll start off with a real kind of a softball for you. Just speak your mind here. As a retired educator and union member, what are your impressions on how the session has unfolded thus far, especially now that we've cleared the two-thirds mark?
Well, in terms of education and union issues, I would say that I have a lot I could say about education. I feel like we're somehow avoiding all these right to work angles on what's happening here. The worst bills I'm seeing are not related to right to work. There was one sort of attempt, but didn't go very far. But there are various attempts to undermine the power of labor at some level. In education, though, I'm on the education committee, and I hear a lot of weird bills. And actually, there are a couple I can put on everybody's front burner if you're looking for bills to interact with and engage with. One in particular is Senate Bill 525, which I haven't actually heard in education in the House side yet, but it's made it through the Senate. And this is a bill that wants to replace school counselors with chaplains, um, or make that at least a viable option, which, as you can imagine, I'm sure anyone here would think was a little weird. Um, so I haven't heard in committee. I'm really looking forward to that because I got a lot of great questions I want to ask about that one. Um, Thankfully, there are actually a lot of Bozeman folks who have already spoken about wanting to give testimony. Um, so I would encourage you to maybe engage on that particular issue, though there are a lot of people who will be doing so already. Um, that's the first one that comes to mind, and I could go on and on about education. That's the committee I'm actually the most engaged with because it's an area where I feel like I have a lot of comfort and knowledge. So that's in a nutshell, education and labor. I didn't say much there, but
Yeah, that 525, that is a big one. We actually made sure to put that in our newsletter this week because
oh, good.
chaplains in schools, uh, no, just no. And we'll go ahead and move on to my next little question here. I
Joe,
wanted to
Joe,
ask
can
you
I
about
ask
the,
before we move on, could I just stay with education for a moment?
oh,
Um,
absolutely, go for it.
because my understanding is earlier in this session, some big school voucher bills were defeated. And
Yes.
actually, you recounted that in one of your newsletters, Peter. And can you do
Yeah.
a mini recounting of that?
Yes, I certainly can. That was a good moment in our process. So SB 320, I believe it is. Well, first of all, I should say as a side note, one thing that happens up here is you start to feel like you remember numbers like they're words or vocabulary or something. It's very strange. But HB 320 was a privatization bill. My guess is that people here are all somewhat familiar with it, and this is a bill that was attempting to allow um, uh, allow people in private schools to draw money to not submit taxes for what they're spending. I'm being simple here, but it would have been a very expensive bill, and a version of this happened in Arizona already. And because of the way it was crafted, it's taking a huge sum of money from the public coffers. And I won't get into the details of it, but the story is that we just did a lot of work whipping votes. Honestly, there were plenty of Republicans who didn't really love it, and our job was really to move the needle. They were on second reading in the House. I don't remember it was very close. And then we spent a lot of time, myself and my colleagues on the Education Committee in particular, spent a lot of time looking for those people in the middle, sort of the reasonable Republicans, to sort of pull them over to our way of thinking, and we pulled it off. So 320 died, and it was a great moment. There's a lot of, I feel like a lot of what happens here for Democrats, the best of our work really is being the party of no. We have occasional bills to get through that are really exciting, but in a lot of ways, our work is what can we do to build coalitions with parts of the Republican Party that allow us to stop legislation? And the Senate and the House, because of the way things have been going this year, are very different in the way they take that on. The Senate's got its own very complicated version of that compared to the House. But in our case, there's a lot of building alliances, sometimes with the sort of reasonable Republicans who I see eye to eye on or eye to eye with on a lot of issues. And then sometimes actually with what I would call the extreme Republicans on certain issues as well. So I think I have an example that I can share about later on. But so that's a big part of the, and as you can imagine, that's a big part of the political process, building those relationships with people in different parts of the Republican Party and trying to sort of bring them over when it seems to make sense.
And when it comes to education, what are
Yeah.
is it the moderate Republicans who you're talking to mostly about education?
Uh,
What are the arguments
yes.
that influence them?
So it's interesting. The politics of education is really interesting to me in a lot of ways. So the Education Committee on the House side is, I think, the most democratic or reasonable committee in the House. The Republican who runs it, Linda Rexton, is a past superintendent. She's very down to earth about kind of, she understands how schools function, even if we don't agree on a lot of things. There are a lot of things we do agree on. And so she just rejects out of hand what she calls bomb thrower bills. And when the head of a committee really thinks something, the way this works is it has a lot of influence on the other folks in the committee. But on the other side, in the Senate, it's a I think a lot of the committees are a lot more nutty, frankly, than on the Democratic side. What happens there is they have a lot of these committees are actually quite conservative, but the game is to get them from the committee so that they don't, and then bring them directly to the floor, where there's more ability to move the needle on these bills there. So, but anyway, so I don't know if I'm fully answering your question, but the politics of the Education Committee in the House is very down to earth. We get along really well. We have a really great dynamic in there, and there's some very reasonable Republicans in that group. I think people probably said, "Hey, I want to be in education." The people who say they want to be a part of the Education Committee, I think, are often people who really are genuinely interested in our schools at some level. They have some background in the schools, so they have experience in some way with the schools, not necessarily, but a lot of the time. Um, we get into trouble though when the general party says we expect everyone to vote a certain way. So that happened with 320, for instance. There were people in there who did not want to vote for 320. We swayed one person to vote with us, and others would have voted with us, but they were essentially told no in certain terms. You have to put this on the floor. So I'm not sure. I can't even remember exactly what the question was, but hopefully that answered.
Oh, I guess I was just wondering how pro-public education is the Republican Party in
Yeah,
Montana right now?
that's a good question. There are some people who say that they are, but they are clearly not, or they say that, oh, I'm for public education, but I'm also for private education and homeschooling, and then also, of course, investing in those programs and taking money, that tax money, and putting them toward those programs, even when they're religious. There's a lot of that gets told, but I would say, amongst moderates, I mean, they don't want to see the public schools go away. They're not into sort of ruining the public schools exactly. And there are enough people in that camp that we can often build coalitions to bring them to our side. But the problem is that they also will vote for bills that hurting public schools indirectly. So there was a bill we heard from Senator Fuller. I don't actually remember the number, on Friday afternoon, that had to do with it's what we put in the category of, I don't know what you call them, bathroom bills exactly, but it was one of these bills that is saying that Kids should not be able to share with, school counselors and teachers about their personal lives, and keep it private. It needs to go to the parents. That was the point of the bill, and the parents should be engaged with that. And we hear those kinds of bills, and Republicans ultimately tend to side with those bills, even if they're kind of pro public education, even though those are frankly destructive, obviously, to the public schools. I mean, if kids can't count on trusting their caregiver, their teachers, then it's a big problem. So there's a lot of that sort of thing, sort of supportive, but at the same time willing to go along with these narratives that can lead to trouble for public schools indirectly. But they usually pay for money to go to the schools when it comes right down to it. They'll pay for. A lot of them will support the STARS Act, for instance, which is not a full throttled money giver to the schools, but it is money to the schools, right, to the public schools. So
And that bill was Senate Bill 299, the
the one
one that
Fuller's bill.
required like the school to tell the parents everything the kid
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, and I would actually, if you want a bill to engage with, I would actually encourage you to step up with that one. It's a really, it's just a horrible. It was just the committee hearing was, wow, it was hard. We had people in the LGBTQ community standing up and telling their personal stories. One in particular was really, talked about how she came out in, I think she was 15, to her teacher. It was the only safe place she could do that. And she wasn't comfortable with her parents yet. And it was the whole story of what happened and how he was so thankful that this person was there for her to walk her through the process. She ended up communicating with her family about it, but it took time and there was therapy involved. And, it was a long process. And she just said, if the school had immediately told my parents, she essentially suggested she wasn't sure she would have stayed. She might have committed suicide. She didn't say it in quite those terms, but that was clearly the message because she was so in such rough shape. There was testimony like that, which is, I mean, it's hard to listen to that and think you're going to support this bill. And the Republicans in that committee, it's just if they vote for that, it's gonna make me nutty. Like I don't know exactly what I'm going to say to these people, but that's some of what we face.
Hey,
Yeah.
Peter.
Hey, Jennifer,
Nice to see you. And
you
thanks
too.
so much for the work you're doing. I don't know how you guys do it. It's a lot and really seems relentless. I'm sort of been paying attention in my spare time to stuff that's happening with local government and
Yes.
um have really, and I
Mm.
guess it's not a surprise based on past sessions, but the number of bills that feel like they're directed towards Bozeman and or Gallatin County seem extreme. Is that your impression?
Yes.
Well, or am
Yes.
I paranoid?
Thank you for bringing that up. So I serve on three committees. I serve every morning in state administration, which that's a committee that's hard for people to get their minds around a little bit, but it has to do with figuring out all the departments and kind of rules related to how they operate. But it also has to do with voting, how voting works, and so on, and rules around that. But then in the afternoon, I flip back and forth between education and local government. So I have local government committee every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. And of my three committees, that is the one that is the most heart-wrenching and frustrating for me as somebody from our county. I cannot tell you how difficult I find it. You would think that in education I would find it frustrating because I have a personal experience in the area, but actually not so much. In state administration, there's some things I don't like, some things I do, and there's a mix. But local government drives me nuts, and it's because it is common. And I did put this in, I think, in one of my newsletters. It is common to encounter bills that are clearly targeting Gallatin County and Bozeman in particular, and it's just mind-boggling. I mean, there's one particular group of folks, Jennifer Bacchus and her team, who have been causing all kinds of trouble for Gallatin County and I think Bozeman too. Um, they come into all kinds of hearings and they all tell these stories about how they're getting ruined by our Gallatin County and our government,
Yeah.
And then what they do is they use that as a way to pass bills that are very well. The message that you get, and typically they are run by people like Jed Hinkle.
Mhm.
He's a common one. These bills are often sort of speaking for a handful of people, sometimes maybe just two or three people,
Mhm.
and they make the case that our local government is a mess. It is abusive. It's irresponsible. I mean, every time these come up, it's endless, and it is so difficult because the process that these committees run on doesn't allow for a lot of real discussion. It really, when the committee hearing is going on, all we can really do is sit there and ask questions. And even then, there are restrictions on that. So if I'm going to ask a question, I have to preface it with a sentence or two, and then I ask a question. I can't
Yeah.
say, "Hey, what about this?" I've heard this, I can't have a real conversation. And it's so difficult. In every committee, I think for me, that's probably the hardest part of this process for me. It's taken me a long time to figure out how to do that. But in local government, these things are said, and maybe there's no one there to ask the right question to get an answer that you really want to get in the room. Um, and so you have to just kind of take it. It's like I feel like I'm standing there for Bozeman, Gowan County, and I just have to sit there taking it.
Mhm.
There are three of us on the committee from Bozeman. Ed Staffman's on there with me, and also Kelly Corden.
Yeah.
Um, but it's just now, thankfully, because there are three of us, I think this is part of it. We've managed to sway the Democrats on that committee to really understand our position in our particular government. Um, a lot of folks on the committee go along with this. This is part of the problem. Rural voters do not understand. Even a lot of city people do have no concept of the kind of crazy life that we have in Bozeman. I really think it's safe to say they have no concept. So they don't get it. And so
Mhm.
I will put it in the room, or Ed will put it in the room or something. And I don't think they just don't get it. So
Mhm.
actually, one of the real interesting moments that we had was related to a bill attempting to allow six-story buildings in
Yes.
commercial zones.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it will end up passing just because of the politics involved. But anyway, it was one of these bills, and and it was all about, oh, more housing means more affordability, and it was that kind of thing. And
Mhm.
and of course, we were all, and actually, the scary thing to me was it was from a Democratic senator
Right.
from Missoula who has libertarian
Missoula.
leanings, and so there was weird politics there too. Like she was really frustrated that we were negative, you know.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but Ed, thankfully, he did a really good move. He went and he knew this was coming, so he looked up prices of places like this,
Yes.
and they were $1.5 million for these places, and he passed them out to the committee. And they were
Mhm.
blown away. They know this, and but the argument was being made, hey, if we're going to have more affordable housing, we need to build these, and that's going to solve our problem. And it was we managed to put in the room during that discussion, look, everybody, we're in our community, which is a growing community, that is not necessarily, we need more housing, but it can't just be more housing. There has to be a way. We have to give cities an opportunity to consider how they're doing this so that it can be
Mhm.
affordable.
Mhm.
But they always take the private property perspective. It doesn't make a difference. Who cares if these apartments are going to out of staters who are just trying to move here and have a ski pad? Um, it's their property. They should be able to do what they want. And if they do what they want enough, we'll all get more affordable housing. So anyway, there's a lot of this, and it was clear that rural people just don't understand. They cannot
Yeah.
get their minds around the idea that we need to have some kind of control, and that our communities need to have tools involved to work on these things. Taking these tools away is not going to work, and they take them away typically with this tone of judgment, judging that those people in Bozeman don't know what they're doing. I mean, they don't really say that, but that is definitely the message.
Right.
And they talk plural. But it's I mean, I think it's the one committee where I walk out of there somewhat frequently feeling like I had a couple times I could feel my blood pressure just
Mhm.
boiling. And I never had blood pressure issues. I could just feel my gut just raising up, and it was so hard. Um, and every time I go in there, there's one of these. The last one was 889. I think it was
Yes. I
889.
listened.
You know about
Yep.
this?
Hinkles.
Um, And it was just some of those bills. It's just trying to take away our ability to manage our city, manage growth, and not and have less abilities to manage what we're doing with growth. And it didn't make any difference what we said about, well, how can we not? How can the community not manage its growth? I mean, it's really hard. There are people in there who just do not get it at all. You know, in
Mhm.
education, I think they kind of do get a lot of this, but here it's almost like they just cannot see. We're not seeing the same thing. And because the Republicans run the committee, and the chair is really very much pro development at all costs, um, it ends up feeling hopeless every time I walk in there. So that's really hard, and it's going to be very hard in our community. And I don't really see a way around it. I'm constantly trying to think about ways to get there. One of the troubles we have is that there's some of the folks who are in affordable housing, less so from Bozeman, but from Whitefish, Shelter Whitefish,
Yeah. Yeah.
are they really do agree with property developers and those folks that the best way to solve this problem is to, sell
So,
off public lands and build, build, build. And if we do enough of that, we'll solve our problem. And
yeah.
so, like, there's this young dynamic guy who I appreciate in a lot of ways. His name is Jake Brown. He represents Shelter Whitefish. And it is so hard for me to watch this guy walk in the room and make that kind of case when, the evidence clearly in our community is there's nothing that simple. And and so sometimes I really think I've been trying to reach out to Bozeman Tenants United and get them to engage. Still trying to figure out the best way to go about doing that. I've talked to Joey a couple times to get his take on this. Um, I've still not quite figured out the best person to connect with, but it seems like there should be somebody who's paying attention to when these bills about, say, short-term rentals, as came up this week
Mhm.
as well,
Mhm.
that you know they should put 10 people on a bus and send them up there and have them tell their stories, because it would counteract these stories from
Mhm.
homeowners who, I can't afford to stay in Bozeman. We hear those kind of stories, but we don't hear stories from people who are just trying to actually live in Bozeman, not even talk about owning a place.
Right.
And we need those voices in the room. And there seems to be no organizing going on the other side of this. We have, a lobbyist from Bozeman, but sometimes lobbyists from Bozeman, Gallatin County are hesitant to stand up because, uh, the accepted voice in the room is, oh yeah, of course Bozeman's going to say that. It's that
Mm,
kind of thing.
right.
So they're very
Yeah.
careful about speaking because they don't want to. It's better to get Billings to do it, or Kalispell to do it, or
Right.
another community who's dealing with similar issues. Um,
I tend to agree with you, though, that I think it's important for legislators to kind of hear the other side of the Bozeman
yeah,
story.
yeah,
And we have a number of groups that are organizing here and showing up on a local level
yeah,
and very frustrated when they hear how our hands are tied. And I try to repeatedly kind of bring it up, but it's past tense. It's like our hands are tied because of something that's happened in the past. And then meanwhile, we're getting more examples coming down the
yeah.
pike of having our hands tied. And I'd love to see these groups kind of participate because they're participating in city government in a big way, which I
Yeah.
think is terrific. It's like we need that kind of um, engagement and passion to kind of make a difference. But they need to take it to the next level and show
Right.
up in Helena too.
And if you all can help me to think about who the best person, I mean, Tennessee United is so interesting because there's so many different
Oh,
people
yeah.
involved.
I'll I'll
And
I'll see what I can do.
you- thank you. And then
Yeah, it would
also
be.
part of the problem is that now we're late in the session, right? It's almost like I don't know how many bills are going to come around that they're necessarily going to want to forcefully engage with. The short-term rental one would have been perfect. But I deal with
Mhm.
so many bills. I don't tend to stay, 2 weeks ahead of all these bills. It is pretty hard. But somebody like, it could be, say, Danny, who I know is lobbying for Bozeman, could keep an eye on that and reach out to people. I know that's not exactly the city, but it kind of is the city. That is a big part of the city. I've talked with her about this a little bit. We've discussed it. And again, part of the problem is that when you're in these meetings, we're seeing another part of the tenants aspect, which really is pro growth, pro growth, pro growth. There was
Mhm.
another bill that we encountered that was taking away parking restrictions from developers and wouldn't
Yeah.
allow us to put parking restrictions. I'm simplifying, but essentially would take away parking restrictions. And that's just crazy. I mean, so we don't have any leverage. I mean, it was just like if we let developers not have to even think about parking, it'll cost less to build these places, so they'll be more affordable. I mean, it makes sense at a basic level, but
Mhm.
obviously it's a lot more complicated than that. So
Right.
so issues like that would be great to It'd be great if somebody were in the middle of trying to sort of see those bills on the horizon, or maybe interact with somebody like me or Ed or somebody or Kelly or something like that, so we know they're on the horizon. And then, okay, here it comes, and there's a system in place. Like we're going to have these people go. They love engaging this way. We want the most articulate. A lot of people is always good, but even better is what I'm learning really is you want the right folks that are going to be articulate, one, will share a variety of viewpoints, and they're going to get taken seriously by the people who happen to be on the committee, right? So
Right.
that's a whole nother part of this. If they get written off for whatever reason, it just kind of doesn't work, you know.
Yeah. One individual showed up for Ellie Boldman's bill, the
Yes,
six-story, that gal
yep,
from Bozeman. And it was unfortunate she was so emotional. I think that detracted
yep.
from
Oh,
her
that's interesting.
effectiveness.
I
But
thought she was
I
actually
don't know.
effective. Actually, it's interesting you say it. She was actually, I thought, quite effective, and I really appreciate her voice in the room because she
Yeah.
wasn't a lobbyist, and she was so genuine.
Yeah.
Allison
Yeah.
Sweeney, right?
Yep.
And she was
Right.
so genuine, and so just kind of was over the edge emotional. It got the whole community to think, well, maybe these Bozeman people aren't making this up. It was
Yeah.
kind of that. I mean, she was definitely genuinely feeling what she was expressing.
Yeah.
I think that
Good.
was
I'm glad
effective.
you felt that way.
But like for instance, when another bill came to that committee, the one related to our plastics ban, or the plastic bags ban that we voted on in Bozeman, um, a lot of people showed up for that. But it was a lot of people with emotions, and it wasn't. There were a lot of people who kind of stood up there and said things that just weren't going to sway anybody in the room, and it became hard. It was hard for me because everyone meant it, but it wasn't the kind of it was almost. I looked at that. I learned one of the things I'm learning a lot here is how do you present a bill hearing so that it has the most likelihood of being successful. And this one, where all these people, I was so glad that they made done all that work to get there, but it wasn't. It kind of just rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and it was kind of people just emotional. It felt irrational to people who don't
Hmm.
understand their perspective. It felt irrational, I think, to a lot of people in that committee, and it didn't really help. So
Hmm.
that was hard.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was a really hard one. Um,
Um,
so anyway,
can
we
I
don't.
just can I just add that it seems to me that in a general way, there's a gap in Bozeman in terms of political awareness. There's so much participation at the local, at the city level, and then there's high awareness of national things, and there is a gap with the legislature, um, which is the reason the Gallatin Democrats have tried to emphasize the legislature so much.
I think you're totally right. And actually, I
Yeah.
saw that first when I was. That's part of the reason I'm in this process is when I was a teacher. Of course, we were dealing with contracts and getting more support for the schools, and everyone was yelling and screaming about the school district, and it didn't make a difference what we said. If I came in the room and said we have to work in the legislature, that's where all these rules and where the funding is coming from, and it was really hard to get anybody to move past complaining about leadership. I think it's similar. It's very hard to follow what's going on in the legislature. Most of it is not obviously wrong, like some of what's happening in Washington right now. A lot of it is there's a lot of gray maneuvering that it is wrong if you read the whole bill, but it's not right in your face. And there's so many of them, it's hard to really follow them. Um, they're not often so galvanizing.
It
So
might be
yes, I
partly
agree
a
with you.
function of the constricted schedule. Like we were, that
Maybe,
because it's such a short session, that may be
yeah.
part of the reason why awareness just sinks down low.
It could be, though. I will say
Yeah.
this. I think it actually, because it's short, I think there's room to engage more because it is brief. If it's going on all the time, I think it's easy to just say, well, whatever. It's just kind of going on. Um, I'm finding there are definitely some people who engage. I'll tell you, I get hundreds and hundreds of emails every day. I mean, it's really something. Some of them are just cut and paste. Some of them are about issues that are just, um, I'm not really like the Convention of States or something, and that kind of thing. Some of them are constituents. Some are from everywhere. There are all kinds of different messages I get, but there are definitely a lot of people who are engaging. I will say that much. And what I hope that they see, and I think they do see, is that when you do engage, because there are plenty of people who don't engage, you really do have room to impact what's happening. Um, Actually, I'd really love to share some of how to do that engagement. Maybe this is the place to do that. I can give some
Yes,
tips to anybody who
please.
wants to do that, especially if we're recording this. So I used to, a little background here. So before I was in office, I worked for MFPE doing legislative organizing for a few years, and so one of my job was to orchestrate people in a multi-county area, including ours, to basically we were told by Amanda Curtis, hey, here's a bill we need to influence. Here are the legislators we think we're able to influence. So have your people send this kind of message that says something like this to all of those legislators. Okay, so I was doing that for a while, but I never really saw what it sounded like on the other side. I was always curious. So now I'm on the other side and I see the MFPE messages and I see a lot of other messages, and I've learned some things. I know which messages are impactful versus which ones are not. The impactful messages, first of all, are always addressed to a specific representative. So, say Representative Strand. They say, Dear Representative Strand. And the reason for that is even if a lot of what's being said, you're saying to a lot of different people, what happens is when you see all these different emails, when you see ones that have your name, you're more likely to actually open them and look at them. You might write them off in the first two sentences, but you're going to open it up. You're going to see, what's going on. Maybe this person knows me. Sometimes we get messages that'll say, Dear representatives, and it just looks like spam, right? That's when you're seeing hundreds of emails and you don't have any time, you tend to more quickly write those off. Or maybe there's nothing like that. Maybe it just starts talking. Right. And likewise, it's hard to take those as seriously, even though the content could be really serious. So that's number one, address the message to a specific person. Number two, don't cut and paste. Never cut and paste. It's a recipe for disaster. What happens is usually an organization will have done the research and knows the kinds of ideas that we need to be expressing about to make our case. And then what people do is because we're all busy, certainly teachers are busy, we just think, well, I'll copy and paste it and then I'll personalize it at the top and the bottom, but it doesn't work because we immediately see the same language, the same, bullet points, the same way it's structured. And as soon as we see that, it just goes in the trash. I mean, honestly, unless it's from a constituent, it gets thrown away. And so instead, what I suggest is writing a 4 or 5 sentence paragraph. Okay, because if it's really long, no one's going to read it. Sometimes if it's really well written and if it's a constituent, I'm probably going to read it anyway. But when it's really long and you've got hundreds and hundreds of emails and you're getting home at 10:30 at night and you've got no time at all, it's not really going to get read. So you want to write it in 4 or 5 sentences, and it should be personal. It should be about your personal experience or your take on this, and it could be based on evidence that you've picked up elsewhere, and it could include evidence. But if it's really you talking to this legislator about something or you've experienced for whatever reason, that's impactful, right? So there's a real person talking to me personally. And then you really got to sign your name. And underneath you, and believe it or not, there are a lot of people who don't. And then underneath where you sign your name, you really should say where you live. I know that means there are certain legislators that are going to think, well, you're not in my district, but you really should say where you live. And if you are a constituent, I guarantee you that legislator will be paying attention to what you're saying. Um, so I think I covered. Oh, and also in the subject line, you want to say the specific take you have on a bill. Don't just say, about private schools or something, because that just, no one knows what you're, but we don't even want to read the whole email to get a sense of what you're talking about. We want to see it like, do not support HB 320, right? That's what it should say right there at the top. Um, so I think that kind of captures that. I hope that would be helpful. I don't know. Any questions, Zach?
I just want to add on that. Like I totally agree what you said there. Like if you want to make an impact, it has to be brief and straight to the point, and it sounds authentic. Like that's how you can, make an impact in the best way possible. And I was just want to say that like sometimes a lot of people will research a lot on a particular bill or issue, and then they'll cite all of their information and facts. And that's just like another way that's not effective to get your point across. Because like facts don't really convince the people that should try to convince the other side. It has to be about emotion and your lived experience and how like it actually impacts your life. Because like other than that, it just sounds like you're trying to like cite an article or some kind of study, and you're not gonna sound like authentic. So yeah, it just the bottom line is it has to be from like your own heart or your own experience, really.
I like that heart and experience. I would say that's crucial. Yeah. And also, I would say too that some people use email, but you can also be quite effective in a voice message or a text. Um, all these are tools that can work, but I would take them all on pretty similarly. Speaking of that, I do kind of want to talk about, or do you have quite, I wanted to talk about a bill and an experience I had this week. I don't know if this is a good time for that, but are you going to the next question, Joe, or where are you there?
Well, I'm just fielding some chat questions about your newsletter,
Oh,
and
okay.
yeah, and because Eric asked in the chat if you had a newsletter, so I went in and threw the link in there. So
Yes.
you're gonna have a new subscriber. So
Super. Yes, if you are, yes, I have slowed a lot on my newsletter in recent weeks, which has been hard for me because I was really enjoying it. I'll talk just briefly about that actually. I started writing this thing because I like to write, and I was coming home loaded with thoughts and feelings every day. And then I sent it out thinking, I don't know if anyone's really going to read this. And I guess people have been really enjoying it. But if you do read it, just know it's really not a report on all the bills you should be following or that sort of thing. Most of it is really just about my personal experience. I do have one kind of in the works right now, but again, it's taken a while for me to get out there. And for anyone listening here, if you want to sign up for that, if you go to repstrand.com and at the top, there's a button that says get updates, I believe. That's the place to go. If you click on there, you'll figure it out. Um, the questions?
so I think that's all we have in the chat for the newsletter
Okay,
information. So now we'll move on to the other thing I wanted to ask about the bill you've sponsored, House Bill 575 on public defender
sure,
assignments. And how
sure,
did you
sure,
end up
sure.
kind of getting roped into that? How'd you end up as the
Great
sponsor for that
question.
bill?
So as a newcomer, I was coached. Newcomers, we show up here and we're really sort of overwhelmed by all the different things going on and all the steps and all the intricacies and trying to figure it all out. The rules, we had these rules books we're constantly trying to read and understand. And I was coached. We were all kind of coached to be very slow on signing up for a lot of bills. There are some Republicans who have taken on, 30, 40 bills, even as freshmen, which is crazy. Um, I was coached very specific, well, not specifically me, but we were all very much coached to go with just a couple of bills and, use them as a way to learn about the process and make them manageable enough and simple enough that you can go all the way through to the end and it should work out. And they don't have to be there. A lot of us have not taken on bills that are necessarily that easy. I started with two bills. One that was this one 575, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the other bill that I started working on, Jennifer knows all about, it had to do with transportation laws in Bozeman in particular, but for the state. And I won't get too caught up in that. I figured out through the process there that the politics of that bill were more complicated than I ever really imagined. And it got to the point where it's pretty clear it wasn't going to pass this session. So I decided to pause on it and wait for a next session. So there's some time to continue to work on it. That leaves me with one bill. I do have a study bill that will be coming out soon as well, but 570. So essentially, there's another category of bills that you get caught up in. They're called agency bills. And these are bills that state agencies need to pass that are helping them to function in some way to do their jobs better. Some of them are really non-bills that, so they want to change a one word in statute that gives them a little more flexibility or something like that. And you don't really do anything. Nobody cares. The bill I'm running, HB 575, essentially expands what the Office of the Public Defender can do in order to get their work done. And I don't want to get too into the weeds of it, but essentially it allows the public defender, gives them more resources to do their job. I'm being very simple here, and it expands the kind of proceedings that they can be in charge of in terms of giving counsel to their people. And at first, I thought, oh, it was an agency bill, but then I realized, I mean, obviously, the Office of the Public Defender plays a really important role in society, and it was a great way for me to really learn about their work, but also engage with an issue that the more time I spend with it, the more important it feels to me. So it's not, I've had to definitely work to convince people. It's not an obvious slam dunk bill. I've had to do some political maneuvering to get it out of the House. There was one House member a lawyer who, it's a legal bill, so I'm not a lawyer, so I had to really get my mind around it and get my ducks in a row. And I knew kind of what they were going to critique, and I was prepared. And oh, great, got it out of the House, and it's in the Senate. I'm going to a hearing for it on Tuesday in the Senate Judiciary Committee. Yeah. So that's where I am. But I can tell you in this first session, what I've ended up doing is I've been keeping track. Now that I'm here and I have a better understanding of the process, I'm keeping track of the kinds of bills, if hopefully I get reelected, that I think are really great bills, really things that could make things happen. I do have a study bill in the works I can talk about media literacy. Um, what happens is, and I didn't understand this before, but there are different stages in the process, different kinds of transmittals. There's the transmittal you hear about where all the general policy bills have to make it out of the House by that time. And then recently we've been spending a lot of time on appropriations bills, and basically we're done with those. Monday, we're doing a little bit more with big money related bills, not small money related bills. And then a lot of the attention goes to two things. It goes to Senate bills, which we've been hearing from some, bills that made it out of the Senate are now in the House. But we're going to hear a lot more of those. And also study bills. So what happens is if you want something to be studied in the interim that maybe we could create a law about down the road, you create a bill that basically says, hey, approve this bill, and then we will study it during the interim in one of our interim committees. And it goes through the same process as all these other bills do. But it's just saying, hey, let's study this. This should be something we should be learning about. So media literacy for me is a definite hot button. It's all about getting kids to understand, getting the schools to think more about how we're teaching kids to deal with all of the media that they're processing in terms of being good citizens, so that their information is reasonable and valid. That's a simple version, but so I have a bill about that will be coming out and starting up next week sometime.
I look forward to seeing the text on that one. That stuff like little things like that, the important things.
Yeah, yeah. Kelly
And in
Quarterman had a
terms of
bill.
bills that, hmm?
Kelly Quarterman had a bill actually that went to this, that he wanted to actually make a bill out of this during the session, and it didn't pass. And it was clear to me when I watched the process that the committee just didn't even really understand the scope of the problem. So he comes at it from an IT perspective, and so he's very aware of the problem. But when he put it in front of the committee, somebody like me thinks, "Oh yeah, this is obvious." But for the committee, they just could not. they just can't quite understand why that would be something. So by studying it, hopefully people will learn, oh, I see, this really is something we should be working on. So
Yeah, I remember seeing that on his list of bills. And I'm actually kind of keeping on things because I want to make a list of bills like from that I saw in the state legislature this year that we can make sure get put on the agenda for the next go round if they don't clear it this time. Because that usually it takes more than one legislative cycle for things
true.
to get passed once they become an idea.
I've got two stories about that. One of them is actually one of Kelly Corden's bills that I think it's my favorite bill of the session, actually. One of them. Um, he has a bill that refunds application fees for rentals, and he's been working it for I don't know, I think maybe every session he's been in there, and he got it through the House, and he did some real interesting political maneuvering. He blasted out of the committee and got it through the House, and like, it's so exciting. And then I don't know how far it is in the Senate yet, but it's looking. I think it might have made it out of the Senate. Actually, I can't remember where it is, but it was so exciting. I think for my constituents, a lot of them, a lot of Bozeman people, that's as impactful as any kind of property tax changes. So that was fabulous. And then there was another bill. I lost my train of thought there. I guess that was the main one I want to talk about. Oh, I know the other one that
Yeah.
was exciting that way is relates to Indigenous Peoples Day. Um,
Hmm.
so this is a bill that has been in process over and over again in the legislature, and each time it's adjusted. And actually, Carson and Dee Dee came up and they gave testimony as part of this crowd, and they did an amazing. It was the best presentation I've seen. It was in the State Administration Committee, and in the past, it's never made it out of the or the Senate. This time, it made it out of the Senate. It's in the House. It hasn't made it to the floor yet, but I think it'll probably pass on the floor in its current iteration. So that's really exciting. I know it feels like compared to some of these other things, it's not as big of a deal, but it's huge
Yeah,
for
and
obvious
also
reasons.
feels like for the Republicans, it takes them about 6 to 8, maybe 10 years to catch up on the problem or whatever the issue is. Whether that's about housing or property taxes or just if it's a small thing like the rental applications. Is that like, people like me living in Bozeman, like rental applications have been a problem my entire adult life. And, you know, and I've seen that bill, Kelly's bill to get that through for the past 3 sessions. It's like we've been talking about this for like the past 6 to 8 years, and now they're finally just catching up. So that's just
Mhm.
my observation there.
No, no, I think that could very well be true. I mean, also, I think the first time a bill like that comes around, people don't get it, they don't understand it, and then it gets changed. Because each time it gets adjusted in order to maybe get a win. So anyhow, that was exciting. Those are two exciting bills. Yeah,
Julia?
Julia was.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about HB 950 before we run out of time.
Yes, happy
Yes.
to talk about it. That was a really interesting experience for me this week. It's sort of a convoluted story, but I'll give it to you. So HB 950 was put into motion by a Republican legislator who I wouldn't call him a moderate, but he's certainly not a crazy conservative. He's common sense in a lot of ways, the way he thinks. He's from Red Lodge, and it started up when when the conflict had essentially looked like it was stopping. Okay, so the conflict had slowed down, and we were starting to kind of rethink how this was all going to play out. This is the bill that sought to put a trade office from Montana in Israel. Now, Montana has trade offices in two other countries, Japan and Taiwan, so it's not unprecedented, and it definitely brings us business. It costs $500,000, and over time, it was going to cost a lot more money than that. Um, and the argument made for the bill was this would bring us business because there are some similarities in the kinds of businesses, tech businesses in Israel and Bozeman in particular. Bozeman was talked about. Optics, for instance, artificial intelligence. There are a few areas but there are some companies that are doing a lot of work in Bozeman. So the thinking was, we'll connect these companies and they will succeed more. And Bozeman will get a big boost, which means Montana gets a big boost. And isn't this great? So early on, in the House, what happens is, as you're in a session listening to debates, bills kind of come by you, and there's a place to sign up to co-endorse the bill. Some people have the idea that if you endorse a bill, if your name is on there, you're running the bill. It is your bill, kind of like in the Senate in Washington or something. But it's not like that at all. It's more like somebody has a bill and they want people to put their name on it, so it looks more supported, and so they move on. So you get these bills coming across your desk while you're listening to a debate, and you're dealing with some other thing you're doing. And they kind of come past you. Most of them are all Democratic bills, and generally you're going to support them, and especially if you know the legislator. So like Melissa Romano sends me a bill. I know it's going to be some educational thing I'm going to want to support. So I usually just sign up without even thinking too much about it. I read the first 3 sentences. I think, of course, I'm going to put my name on this. So one of them came by that Ed was passing around. Now, Ed gets us some interesting, he's learned, for him, it works really well to do some wheeling and dealing for his bill. So he gets a little more involved with that than a lot of us do, certainly than I do. So he had figured out, if we get people to sign up for this bill about Israel, he'll get some votes the other direction. So he took this bill and he passed it around with these other bills and came around, and it's like, oh, Ed's passing around, and it's talking about bringing money investment in Bozeman. Oh, okay, sure. So I signed up, as did many Democrats. Anyway, I sort of forgot about the bill, frankly. This was some time ago. Well, just, I think Thursday or maybe Wednesday or Thursday, it came to committee. And all of a sudden, I started getting these very heated messages from constituents. The most heated messages I've heard from anybody about anything. I've heard nobody on the right side of the spectrum saying this kind of thing. Nobody on the left. Nobody about anything. Most of the messages I hear are just like, "Please do this. This is why." That kind of thing. These were dark. One of them was threatening me in various ways. In particular, a phone message. And I thought, oh my God, what have I done? So then, of course, I looked back at the bill and I realized what was going on. I thought, oh my God. So I was pretty stressed. These are my constituents. Obviously, I'm not like Mr. Pro-Israel, anti-Palestine or something. So then I realized what I had done and what had happened and how I didn't really want to support this bill. And frankly, I could make an attempt to get my name off the bill. But at that point, once it gets through a committee, it's pretty hard to do. You can't really do it. So, what I did was, I actually decided I was just going to call these people back, even if they made pretty wild accusations on the phone. So I just called people up and said, "Hey, look, what?" And then, and I got some pretty tense interactions. People were angry, and really, there was a lot of judgment and conflict. And what I realized was, some of the people who were reach out to me with this intensity is because, they've been following this really difficult topic for a while, and they're kind of over it, and they're angry, and it was hard to ever have really down to earth, just kind of reasonable and quick talk about it. So I tried very hard to say, look, the best way you can do this, if you want to move the needle, is you gotta, at least for representatives, here, not in DC or something, the best thing you can do is really just be down to earth, share your point of view, share your experience. That's the best way to make a change. So after a few conversations like this, I kept being sent to somebody else, and I kept talking to interesting people who were more powerful in this group or more influential in it. It became just an interesting set of conversations about the process. Okay, so then the next day, 9:50 came to the floor, and I realized I really should stand up and speak up against this bill. And especially after all the conversations I've been having, I thought, well, this would be a great way to show that, look, we got to, this is not a good bill. And then of course, people were sending me talking points, right? Because the folks involved in this group, they got a lot to say. They've been spent a lot of time reading about the data. And so I got all this talking points, and I thought, yeah, I'm going to talk to this bill. And I kind of it's kind of interesting talking on the floor. And so Friday afternoon, the bill got introduced. I punched in with speak to the bill, and I stood up and I gave this speech. I don't know if I guess you call it a speech. I mean, they're pretty brief on the floor of the House, but and I talked about genocide, and I talked about all these problems. These are not neutral technologies, and I got all into this whole thing. And I played the politics in a way where I thought I might be able to sway financial conservatives to maybe come with us. And I mean, I said some pretty wild things, and I thought for sure, not wild, not for wild from my perspective, but certainly dark things, talking about genocide and the International Court of Justice targeting only Israel for genocide, right? All this kind of, you don't tend to talk about that in the floor of the legislature. And so I thought somebody would start yelling, screaming, but nobody really did. And then I ended with talking about money. Why don't we put this $500,000 into programs that serve Montanans, or maybe property tax relief, or something else? But or if we're going to get a trade office, let's maybe do it in, say, Germany or one of these other countries that actually we do more trade with anyway. Um, and so I ended, and I didn't know what was going to go here, what happened, and then all these financial conservatives all started chiming in too. So we killed the bill. I felt super productive. Sometimes when you speak on the floor, you don't really feel like you're doing anything, but it definitely felt like I made a difference. And it came out of these constituents and these people who were speaking to me and speaking up. So it was really an interesting experience. The whole thing, from constituents to floor speech to affecting what was going on in the House. Uh, it felt really.
What
That's what
I
I'm doing.
had
Sorry.
read that Brian Close also spoke, and but that he was then
Yeah.
reprimanded.
Um,
Did that?
Yeah, two other people spoke actually. Jamie Isley did, and Brian did. Um, they both spoke briefly. Jamie spoke. There were a few of us who spoke. It wasn't just me. I don't want to make the
But
case
there
it was just
wasn't a
me.
reprimand. I had,
No, he got reprimanded because of the way he spoke up.
oh,
But what happens sometimes when you're on the floor is you get really heated and you're like, I can't even believe this. I'm so amped up. Brian's been a great legislator. I just want to say he's been doing a really great job. But when I watched him, I could see that it got the better of him. We're all spending a lot of time paying attention to our neighbors. So that if somebody starts popping up too quick, we kind of say, no, no, don't do it. Because there's some weird games that happen there. He stood up in anger about something that was related to something I had said about genocide in the Court of Justice. And I think what he wanted to talk about actually was that Russia was also being looked at for genocide. And he kind of just, the problem is that when you stand up, the rules of the House say that you have to operate in a very specific way. He stood up pretty amped up, started getting into this topic, and it was unclear the way it started. It sounded to the chair of the House, that was the chair for the day, Butchery, that he was going to be out. He was out of line the way he was doing it, and he was told to stop. So yes, he was kind of, I guess you call it reprimanded. Um, Reprimanded sounds formal. This was not very
but
formal. It's more like, hey, this is out
it
of order.
wasn't because of using the word genocide or
No,
talking
oh
about
no,
war, or it wasn't
no,
that.
because
Yeah.
I talked for, I don't know, 3 minutes about this, and I talked all about genocide and all of the what drones, that all the kids and civilians were getting killed and by drones, and how this technology was helping those drones to be produced. And I was getting pretty detailed about just the same subject. It wasn't because of the subject; it was something to do with the way he started into what he was going to say. Um, he didn't get very far, but altogether we were effective. But it just felt good to sort of be in the middle of that. I spent a lot of time to figure out what I was going to say, and I was really paying attention to these people I had spoken to, and um, so anyway, it was a good moment.
I remember when I
Talking
was
down the
there the
Can I
last
just
time. Oh,
can I
hey,
just say
Eric.
go ahead, Eric.
you sound like a perfect legislator, Peter. I
Well,
mean,
I appreciate
you
that. I don't know
you
if
I mean you listen to a lot of opinions.
yeah,
Some of them were scary, and you change your, only a fool doesn't change his mind. So, or
yeah,
and
well,
I understand
yeah,
what you're explained perfectly. um I am
yeah,
curious about one thing that
yeah,
unfortunately it's a very complex issue, of course, the whole Middle East issue about Gaza right now.
yeah,
But we do have a history of anti-Semitism in Montana. i'm not I'm not Jewish. But I definitely am anti. I'm certainly not Semitic, and I'm not, but I am anti Netanyahu, and I don't know
yeah.
if that kind of subtlety, there's room for that in
So
this kind of a discussion.
yeah, so I'll respond to that. So it's funny when not funny, but when I was out knocking on doors, thousands of doors, I think there were two people that brought up Palestine as an issue. And then both times I basically said, hey, I definitely have a lot of thoughts on that subject, but the legislature tends not to really spend much time on that. So this bill was an exception. There were two bills now that have had to do with this subject. This one, and then a House resolution that was supportive of Israel. And uh, what do I want to say about that? What I tried to do when I was talking, and I think it was successful, was I was trying really hard to say, hey, Israel's doing some crazy things, some really horrible things to civilians. And but I'm really not trying to start an argument about Israel here. That's not the point, right? This is Helena. This is not Washington, D.C. We don't really have a lot we're going to do with Israel. And so somehow there wasn't much said about Israel after that. Because really the point of what I was saying was this is just about, hey, well, let's think more about where we're putting our money here. Is this really a sensible place? It was that kind of a message. Um, I mean, yeah, I hear you, and we can certainly be anti-Israel and not anti-Semitic, though sometimes it's framed differently. But that didn't come up in the room, thankfully. All of that whole subject, and if it had, I think it would have been off the rails. And I would like to think that the chair would have said, "Come on, you all, let's move on from this because this is not we're not coming up with policy about Israel. That's really not what we're about here." Now, there was one bill earlier that was trying to be hurrah, hurrah, hurrah for Israel from a very conservative legislator. And Ed Stafford did a great job of speaking in a way that turned it into it being an anti-Semitic, anti-Semitism bill. Okay, so by the time he had done with it, and the way he had framed it, and we all kind of talked about it, it ended up being really about how anti-Semitism was a bad thing. Even though it was meant to be pro-Israel, 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 it walked away something very different. And so it was great. so so that was really nice. But I'm sure we'll see more of those kind of bills. We did have one bill that was, right after the election, Trump is so great, whereas Trump's amazing, and whereas the Democrats are all radical left woke people, it was one of these kind of stupid bills. But it was like a resolution telling Congress this. Basically, it was like, let's pray to the great king kind of bill. It's nuts. But it didn't really amount to anything because it doesn't really change anything of what we're doing, really. So, you know.
But did that get past the resolution?
I believe it did. I'm not sure what happened to it in the Senate. I've lost track of it. Again, though, I don't know that it didn't really have any teeth. It wasn't really, I'm not really following because it doesn't really change anything, you know. I felt like it was kind of a coup that we managed to change it and to reorient the way it was coming across, so that it was something different than what the author had intended. So um, I can mention I do have some bills that I could maybe bring attention to, that people could maybe tune into, that I was thinking about today. There's one bill that was really frustrating to me. I don't know how much it really is going to affect anything, but it's important to know. House Bill 888, which came up in local government. Actually, Jennifer, you might have watched this. I'm not sure when you're watching 889. Same sponsor, Hinkle, Jed Hinkle. This was the bill that was making accusations about health department officials, and was making assumptions about what they were trying to do that were just wrong. They were really just, they were basically. I don't want to get into the details of it, but the problem with the bill was it was acting as though health officials are willing to do things that are frankly against their code of ethics as public health officials. And that kind of thing just drives me crazy. It's almost the problem with this bill, and actually the problem with a lot of the bills I hear that are anti-Bozeman, anti-Gallatin County, isn't even whether or not they pass. It continues and spreads this stereotype and this assumption about people that is just inaccurate and just disparaging, and it's almost borders on slander, really. And so that was really frustrating. These folks were calling me and saying, "Hey, will you please speak up about this?" And we did, but it was just so hard to watch that pass because Republicans feel like they have to do anything. That they can't get away, even if it makes sense to them, they can't get away with not critiquing public health officials when it comes to, vaccinations and shots and medications and whatnot.
Right.
So, I don't know, it might be worth looking at. I don't know.
Did
There's,
889 pass, speaking of
yes,
Hinkle?
Yes,
Ooh, ouch.
it did. And we wanted it to not pass. I would follow it. That's a really important one. And I would actually follow it in the Senate. The Senate
Yeah.
is such a weird place that they're so different over there.
Mm.
I never understand what they're doing. They
Mhm.
basically what happens is, I think I said this earlier, but the committees themselves tend to be very conservative. And then Pat, because he has a lot of influence, because of the structure of things, they will blast those bills out of committee that these conservative committees don't want to deal with, and then they get dealt with only on the floor. And that's where they can have an opportunity to kill them. But the problem is that on the floor, there's no, you don't hear from proponents and opponents. You don't get the whole story. Basically somebody stands up, makes a pitch about it. People ask questions, maybe have a little debate, but it's different. In a hearing, we might spend an hour on one bill, which could happen on the floor, but that's pretty unusual. Another bill you might want to look at is I think it's HB 822. And this is a bill that has to do with vote requirements for the amendment process, and what percentage of voters, how many voters we need in order to get an amendment to get through the system. And there are a couple of bills like that. I don't have the other number in front of me, but that's a subject that might be worth following through with those. There are a number of bills that come through. Oh, we'll just change it from 50% to 60%, or that kind of thing. And that I think those kinds of bills can be really problematic. And Republicans are trying really hard to limit, because of the way the public is voting in these amendments. They're trying really hard to make it harder. So well, I can end. So I don't know how much more time we have, but I can say a few things about life here. People might
Yeah,
find it
we
interesting.
got all the time you
Um,
want.
I don't know how familiar everybody is with some of this, but uh, you know, there's this strange idea that I heard about when I first showed up, and it's turning out to be true, which is they call it the freshman 15. And the idea is that everybody who comes in on the first session, they gain 15 pounds because of all the sitting and all the eating of food you normally wouldn't eat, and all the drinking and everything. And it is, when I first started, I said, no, I'm a healthy guy. That's not going to happen. I haven't weighed myself recently, but I can tell you it's definitely moving that direction. It is crazy between, sitting all day long endlessly and not really having any serious physical activity, let alone during much of the session till now. You didn't even see any sunlight. I mean, you show up early in the morning, you get out at, 6 or 7 or who knows when, and then, you're just in the dark, you're inside all day. So that's a kind of a weird situation. um, Definitely more drinking than I quite expected, which is interesting. um, Also, we have this process where early in the session, there's a lot of whining and dining that happens. There's a lot of advocacy groups and so on, and lobby groups that have, free dinners, and they host a dinner. And, some people think, well, that sounds weirdly unethical, but the reality is you tend to go to the ones that you already agree with. So it's more like, we're going to Montana conservation voters. Those are my people, and I want to go with them, and they're providing dinner, and they want to talk about issues. So there's a lot of that. But late in the session now, there's less and less of that. Used to be we had free lunches every day. Some group was providing lunch, or there were multiple events at night that you were supposed to kind of go to all of them. And now there are fewer and fewer of those, but there's also longer and longer hours, I suppose, in committees. So interesting. Anyway,
Well, that explains the 15 pounds.
Yeah, no
yeah.
You get free lunch every day, you tend to eat more.
Yeah, and I eat differently, I definitely eat differently in those settings.
Jody, after this response to those two constitutional change bills, they're 821 and 822 in the House. And I think they're both been transmitted to the Senate.
I'm sorry, the amendment bills you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah.
changing the vote requirements for the
Yes.
constitutional amendments.
Right. I think they just got out of the House. Um,
Hmm.
and I will say this, another up note, and if you might know this if you're following things, I'm not in judiciary, but we have managed to kill a lot of bills that are anti the courts. Not all of them, but most
Mhm.
of them. And that's been really fabulous and really satisfying. A lot of folks who were in the legislature last session are are they talk a lot about how exciting it is that they can actually kill bills, whereas before they couldn't kill bills. you know,
Mhm.
it was hopeless, and they were super minority. They were just always down. They could never pass anything, never kill anything. And now there are a lot of bills that we managed to kill, and these judicial bills are some of them. There are a couple of legislators who have been pushing that. One thing we know is that there are 2 or 3 legislators now who are Republicans that the Republicans don't like, and we don't like, and they talk too much, and their positions are just extreme. And whenever they get up and talk, it's almost like we know we've got a chance of killing that bill. We just have to get them to talk longer and alienate more people. So that's very interesting. So, for what
Mhm.
it's worth,
Yeah,
there's hope there.
those 10 seats make it a lot easier to make things make a difference. Because
Yep.
before they could lose so many seats without actually having to worry about losing the vote.
May I
Any
ask
last questions?
I
Yep.
have a last
That's-
question, or
Go
a
ahead.
question. It doesn't have to be the last one. Um, I wish I could remember her name right now, but a Republican legislator who was censured by the
Oh,
Republican caucus. I think she's from
yep.
Belgrade. Shelley Vance. Shelley Vance.
Yep. Yep. In the
that's
And
it.
Senate. Mhm.
yeah, and you know, with all the efforts, all the advocacy we're tied up in doing or trying to do, she's like one person, at least one in all the 9 that I would like to somehow, I don't know, in her favor, believe it or not, say something or do something, or I don't know, ask the Democratic caucus to push back and say, you know, I don't know. I don't know exactly what to do about
So,
it, but it's too
yeah.
bad for me. It seems to me too bad that someone who is staying principled, staying within her party, that actually, is sort of functioning not on in our behalf, but just basically in agreement with Democratic Party, ideas, is just going to be censured, and there's nothing we can do about it as Democrats. I don't know
So
what to.
I'll tell you about that. So yes, I've been following that. So first of all, it's in the Senate, and I'm not nearly as tuned into what's going on over there. And the Senate and the House are very divided. There are a lot of senators who I never see, even if they're friends. Uh, it's kind of a weird thing because they're right down the hall, and I might see them during the lunch hour, or maybe at an event at night, or I'll say hi to somebody, or wave at them somewhere, but I never see them. So like Cora Newman, feel like I'm pretty close to her. I never see her ever almost. Um, so I'm not always very attuned to what's going on in the Senate, and what's going on politically over there is in a whole separate category of complexity. I don't know if it's more complicated, but they've just entered some interesting ground about how the process works and how to use the rules and all of this. So I'm not totally on top of everything going on over there, honestly. But what I do know is that yes, there are a bunch of folks who are Republicans who actually many of them were quite conservative, who did not appreciate the way they were treated early on, and so they didn't want to follow with the Senate president. Who actually was leading the House last session, and there was chaos in the House last session. So I'll be pretty surprised if he gets reelected again. That's Matt Mercier. Um, Now, this group of folks had basically signed up with Pat Flowers and his group, not really in terms of how they were going to vote, frankly, because their positions are not necessarily with the Democrats at all, like Shelley Vance, but more to say, hey, we should be treated with more respect here. We want to really talk about issues. Let's take this process seriously. I think that would be in a nutshell. So they align themselves with Pat and the Democrats and the Republican Party in order to kind of get rid of them and get rid of their power that they're asserting. uh, he ejected them, or they got ejected from the Republican Party, I believe. So it's more than censure. It's almost like, well, you're not Republicans anymore. I think it's just so silly. It's like, come on. But that's the game they're playing. They hope that they'll be primaried, no doubt. In fact, it's safe to say that the Republican Party will be spending money on primarying them to get rid of them. That's the standard Republican approach to these kinds of situations. And yes, it is hard to watch. And yeah, when I see Shelley Vance, I really like her. She's really nice, but I think I like her more now that I know she's in that camp, right? The Democrats can't really do much because, the more the Democrats do, the Republicans see that as, oh, see, you're really a Democrat. So there's only so much you can really do to be supportive aside from in the hall. I try to be especially friendly to those folks, when I see them or I interact with them because I appreciate them. Um, but again, it's not like we're all voting together on issues necessarily at all. So there's that.
Yeah, it's like the top line ones, like the night of the pizza party when they pushed up when they blasted all those bills off of Regeer's desk. That was a crazy night, and that's
Now, I
when the
don't
nine
usually.
really came to be known. Huh?
Oh, I do want to say this too. That actually brings me to something else. I don't think many people realize that they really can watch all of these sessions pretty easily. So, for instance,
Hmm.
you're talking about 950. I wanted to see how that looked on the floor because, like when you speak, it's kind of interesting to see what actually it looked like as it like a third party person. So I could
Hmm.
just go on there. I actually did because I was curious. And you can go to the day, you can say, well, floor, the session, and then if you go to this, and you can do this in committees as well. You just go on the calendar, and then you can see a pull down of um, you can click which bill you want to follow, and it will bring you to that point in the recording, and then you can just watch it, or you could watch it live. But you can do this for any bill. Like if you wanted to see, I don't know, some of the bill that got your attention, like say 888. If you wanted to look that up, you could just look up the bill on Bill Explorer at legmt dot gov, and then look it up, and then go to find the bill number, and then look it up. It's really pretty straightforward. So I would encourage you to do that, especially if you have a bill that's important to you.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how we're starting to get things worked out in terms of outreach with the legislative activities. I know the streaming's been decent in the past, but the new bill explorers, as they get things fleshed out, are definitely improved over the old Legiscans
Yeah.
that looked
In
like they were
Montana
built in
Free,
'93.
really? And in Montana, Free Press is also really great. Has a really great tool, the Capital Tracker, that helps to
Hmm.
kind of find out, where a bill is in the process, who voted for what, for who you might want to try to sway. Um, I actually think in a lot of ways that's a more user-friendly tool for following what's happening with a bill. Um, but with a few minutes here and there, you can find out where a bill is in the process, and when it's going to have its hearing, and how you can speak up and in the hearing, and that's a whole nother thing. So anyway, maybe we should leave it at that. This
Yeah,
is
I was gonna
really
say,
great.
yeah,
This is
I
really
honestly
great
think
being
that
here.
Free Press's work is what really influenced the state to try to improve their outreach approach
Oh,
because
really? That's
theirs was
interesting.
so clunky and old. But yeah, go can go ahead and close this out.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's great being here, and for folks watching and recording this, especially, if you're interested in what I'm doing, reach out to me. I really like hearing from constituents. So, and when I think constituents, obviously, I'm especially interested in people in my specific district, but I consider anybody in the sort of larger Bozeman area as kind of constituents, really, in a lot of ways. So, reach out if you have a thought or you have a bill that you hope that I'll put a little extra attention to, or if you're looking for suggestions on how to influence what's happening with the bill, I'm happy to help with that. I find that to be a really important part of this process. So thanks for watching.